Dice Paper Roll is made on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to the first inaugural episode of DPR MailBag, where we rummage around in our mail sack looking for letters that you've sent us, questions about our shows. My name's Greg Pickering, and today I'll be playing Greg Pickering.
My name's Ben Clements, and I play Ben Clements, the DPR podcaster, and that's my only thing I identify with.
My name's Lauren Bock. I'll be playing Daniel Last.
My name's Daniel Last, and I'll be playing Lauren Bock this evening.
Uh-huh.
My name's Jack, and I'll be playing Emil Freund.
Who sadly cannot join us this evening, which is why we thought we'd do a bit of a mailbag discussion.
Yeah, so we got some questions sent in by a couple of our patrons, which go to the origins of the show and how we went about making both our original content and a little bit that touches on Curse of Strahd as well. So, Ben, do you want to kick us off with our first question?
Yeah, sure. I think, starting kind of outside of the game for this one, we have a question from Tez, which is how do we all know each other? That is the question from Tez. How do we all know each other, and how did we get into playing D&D? This may well be the whole episode.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. So, yeah.
That's true.
Kind of tricky, isn't it? I guess it chronologically goes back. Greg and I
Back into the mists of time.
Age before beauty, so let's start off with you two.
Yeah, definitely. When was it?
I played D&D for the first time in
we're going that far. Okay.
1997. I played my first game of D&D, and it was...
how old were you?
It was
Did you say 87?
97. I was... I was 14. 13? I must have been 13.
Yeah.
And it was like first edition. And I wanted to play the wizard, and I wasn't allowed.
Wizards are hard.
Yeah, it was there was the set box, and the DM was very down the line. Anyway, and then I played on and off all through high school, and then I got a job at Movie World, Hollywood on the Gold Coast. And I met some people on the phones at the back of Bat Ride and told them that I played Dungeons and Dragons. And
What's on the phones? What?
So when the ride starts, it's like a simulator, and everyone who's loaded on, they sit on these platforms, and you got phones that you can call all the other platforms. So everyone would just get on the phones and play like 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you like name someone, and then you've got to get to Kevin Bacon in 7 steps.
Because your job on all these different platforms was to look on a little TV at the camera of the people in the ride, just to make sure they weren't taking off their seatbelts or
that
fucking
kind of
around.
stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Is that the same ride place that had to get sued by the government recently?
No.
No, that's not the one where that's Dreamworld. We never speak of them.
Absolutely not.
Movie World.
I remember that
ours
Bat
was
Ride. I remember
so
going
safe.
on it when I was very, very little.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was probably working on it.
You might have been. In 97, I was
Not
little.
far off it.
Oh,
I
no,
was
no.
like 8 years old.
When did we work there? That was like 2003 or 4?
No,
Okay.
I started
2002.
I started in 99.
Jesus.
Wow.
I met you a few years later, Grego. Yeah. No,
it wasn't. Yeah.
I played my first game of D&D in 1989 when I was in grade
I was
4.
2 years old.
And
Jesus
Fucking hell, I wasn't even born.
yeah.
Ben has been playing D&D longer than I've been fucking alive. What the fuck?
People who listen to the show probably aren't all that surprised by that, Jack.
Wow.
Wow.
But as a kid, I always wanted to play more, and I couldn't. Even after that, that game sort of, it didn't eventuate into a regular thing, and it was something I wanted to do more of, and could never find people to do it. And it wasn't until fast forward 14 years later when I met Greg at Movie World, but actually I was speaking to some of the people he'd been talking to on the phones at Bat Ride, and they said, "Hey, I know someone who can run a game of D&D," and I was like, "Fuck yeah!" And I remember that night vividly.
I was dating a girl, and it was her 21st or something birthday party, and we were there, and I got assaulted by 3 people who were like, "So you play D&D?" And I was like, "Yes." And then they just bundled me up and made me promise. So then I went to this person, a friend of ours, Kai's house, and Ben walked in, his arm in a sling. He'd injured himself, being Batman.
Robin, actually, but yeah.
Oh, Robin. Yeah, okay.
I can tell you when it was 2001 then. I remember that year.
Yeah, right. So 2001. And we played our first game of D&D around a coffee table. It was second edition, was it? Did we play second edition?
Yeah, we were playing.
Yeah, we did
second edition. Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't even know there was a second edition. I just thought it started with 3.5.
For a lot of people, it does.
Ben played
I like the way that
ranger.
Ben was so desperate. You didn't even have a choice. It was you or nothing. That's pretty much what it was?
Well, when
I
you
think-
find a DM
I think-
or someone who is willing to be a DM, most people are like,
Right. I see.
It's sort of the same though. If someone finds out you're a DM, exactly. Everyone's like, "Oh, can you run a game for us?" It's like Greg also used to drive a Ute, like a pickup truck for people in the States. And funny how you always found yourself asking to help people move house.
People needed help moving house all the
Right.
fucking time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back then it was not nowhere near as popular as it is now. And even though I was a DM, it was hard to find people to play with. And I worked for Games Workshop and stuff. I used to play lots of Warhammer, and I still couldn't find a good regular game. And whenever I did play, it wasn't very good. It was either too technical or so playing with bunch of actors, performers was a totally new experience. And straight away we were role playing, and it grew from there. Ben and I played together a lot for what, 10 years
10
or something?
years,
Almost 10 years, yeah.
And that's our closest friendship group pretty much, is the group that played every week for 10 years. And we'd sit outside and play. We'd play for 12 hours.
God,
Yeah.
Jesus.
How many?
And we'd play till 4 a.m. in the morning, and we'd supposed to be working the next day, and we'd both call in sick to Movie World.
And I'd usually call in sick to write more D&D.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many campaigns did you get through? 2 or?
No, I think 2. I think 2, didn't we? We went through. Oh no, we went through more than that. We did the
Campaigns. We've had 5 or 6 epic ones, and lots of shorter versions of characters that never lasted. So yeah.
Yeah, wow.
the Boulder Shoulders, where we played a game where we were all dwarven brothers.
And then we all played a game when we were all rogues.
Yeah. Oh, that was
Oh,
awesome. We
that
played
sounds
a city campaign, and there was a bunch of us lived together, and we just took over the dining room and had the wall covered in hand-drawn maps of this city. And yeah, it was good times.
Good times back before any real responsibility, and you could just spend all your time on D&D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then Ben got into acting school in Melbourne. Did you move to Melbourne before you went to VCA, Ben? Or
No, I moved to do that in 2011. So,
Yeah.
and that's where I met Dan and Emil. We were in the same year at VCA together.
And this is where I take
Um,
over the story.
Yes.
So for me,
this
I'd
is-
always
good radio.
heard about D&D. And it was that whole thing of like, oh, if you play D&D, you're a fucking nerd. Like, you know,
Yeah.
you're
Not
and,
wrong.
You know, not in a
Not
good
wrong.
way.
Stigma, nerd
Yeah,
stigma
bad.
is
And
real.
like, I mean, I
Yeah.
grew up. I'm a massive Star Wars fan. Like, I was a nerd, but I always be like, oh no, I'm a geek, as if that's like something different to a nerd.
Yeah.
Geeks are cooler, you know. But I'd always heard about Dungeons and Dragons, and never knew anyone who knew how to play it or anything like that. And so
This sounds more and more like the French Resistance. You know what I mean? Like Ned and Greg met it like clandestine through word of mouth. You know, you left a note on a bench somewhere and somebody else picked it up. And then Dan had heard rumors of this thing.
magical place, this mystical
And I
place.
wanted to be a part of it and I didn't know how.
I didn't know the
So
secret knock.
I went to a brick in the wall.
And that brick in the
2,
wall
4, 6,
was
so what?
the Victorian College of the Arts, where I went to study acting, and then I met Ben there, and he originally tried to start making. He tried to make a campaign with a couple of other people from VCA. Emil wasn't included in that group, controversially. At first, I was with James
Oh.
Cook and Danny Check when I played Ranger or something. It was 3.5 days, and we had one game session. I was super into it. The other two dudes, not so much. And then it went on. It kind of just fell apart, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then it was what year was that? Greg moved down to.
2016.
Greg came to Melbourne.
Can you recreate
Yeah,
your?
2016.
Blessed us with
Can you-
D&D as a DM because
Can you?
Hang on, I blessed you with D&D a couple of times, but then I just took it away.
exactly. You were
You kinda-
you were teasing
well,
me.
he didn't really.
teasing me.
Yeah, you teased him with it.
You
You're like,
did.
"Ooh,
Yeah.
D&D.
Getting-
Just a
Little bit.
little taste.
But I
Just a
bestowed it
little
upon
taste.
him.
And then you got your real, like your actual dealer came down to Melbourne, and
Yeah.
I met the bikies, which is Greg. You were just like middleman pusher, and then I got
Hello,
hooked on.
would you like to sample my
on the real
D&D?
stuff? I got a steady supply of it coming in.
First taste is free.
It always is.
Sorry, Dad, I
Yeah.
did interrupt you. When did you start playing D&D?
So what year was that? Was that 20?
It was first or second year, so it was 2011 or 2012.
Yeah.
And really the
Oh, so
reason
you played for the first time with Ben.
Yeah, that was the first
I
time.
DM'd for
And it
them.
was one session. We got super wasted and everyone got
We
super
did
distracted.
we did a second the year later.
Yeah.
It was a whole year later because drama school was
So
intense,
intense,
man.
yeah.
It's like 60
Yeah.
hours a week. There was no
Yeah.
time for
Yeah.
that. And the other guys were shit faced. So it wasn't conducive. But I and Greg could probably attest for this, Danny. I had often said there's one guy who would be totally in the group if we were like if he was from Queensland. He's one of us. He's one of us.
He's a nerd.
So when Greg moved down, it was kind of inevitable that we would get a group together.
I drove down from Brisbane and I arrived in Melbourne and Ben was like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, oh, just unpacking and shit. He's like, cool. He's like, cool. What are you doing next weekend? I was like, oh, well, I don't have a job yet or anything. He's like, yeah, you're good. You're running a game of D&D.
Did
So,
you
yeah,
really
this-
do it like that?
No, exactly. It was pretty much. We were
Basically.
already like, that's a total lie. I was like, Ben, hook me up, brother. Where my people at?
The first game was the day that I actually moved in with Ben and Emil into the house. I that morning had brought all of my stuff over and just threw it into my bedroom, didn't bother unpacking a single fucking thing because it was like, it's game day. And that was all that it was about.
Is that? No, that can't be
it was
right.
that day.
Your first game.
Because I remember I was bringing,
so you mustn't have been
bringing some like weights or something in to.
But you mustn't have been at the very first game then, because
that's right.
I
came
because
on the second session.
Emil wasn't initially in the he wasn't on the invite list to come to that game, and some uni people were having a barbecue, and we were talking about starting a new game because I was like, "Hey, my mate's coming down from Queensland. He's a good DM," and everyone was like, "Oh, me," and Emil wasn't on that list, but he called me the day before and said, "Hey, I'd really like to be there. I've never played," and
someone had just dropped out as well.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, cool." And I never really knew Emil super well at uni, and then he came, and the rest.
That's
was
so bold.
History.
Wow.
Glad he did though. Hey?
Pretty Emil style though.
Yeah.
Yeah. If he wants to do something, he does it, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll go next. So I met Ben through my job at Grilled because
which is a burger chain.
which is a burger joint for those non-Australian listeners. And I was working with this guy Dan who also lived with Ben, and I went to a party there at their old place. Well, Ben's current place. And I was just chatting. Oh, I think Ben and I had talked before, I reckon. But he was saying he checked out a video game that I worked on called Armello. And I was like, oh, I'd really like to play the actual game someday. And Ben was like, oh, yeah? Really?
Oh, yeah. What do you?
Yeah. Well,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You like games, do you?
Because, he was like, oh, like Armello's kind of more or less D&D, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess it is. And then
D&D.
Yeah.
Yeah. and
Usually less.
Yeah, probably. And yeah, so he was like, oh, I've got a friend coming down from Queensland. He's
the fucking deal. Ben, how much were you like, I need to make this happen. I need to pull in.
I was rounding the troops
desperate
up for weeks before Greg came because I knew that one of my best friends would need the sanctuary of D&D and some people when he moved here.
You're so kind.
And also I didn't want to be the one lumped into DMing a game, and I knew Greg would do it.
And you were desperate to play D&D. Every time you'd come up to Queensland, you'd be like, oh, man, I wish I had D&D down in
Yeah, but I think, but like when I said to Ben I was interested, because I said it unprompted, I think, and
that's just what he wants you to think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
he'd been manipulating you for an hour.
Exactly. He woke up that morning knowing
been
what
playing
he was
drinks.
Do.
Yeah, he'd been doing research on the video games I'd worked on.
Yeah.
He was like,
never actually played them.
Scoping you out. Never played it in his life.
Like looking up the cards that I worked on, and it's like, oh, mirror image. Yeah, that's like there's a spell in D&D. That's it. I was like, oh, whoa, really? That's actually in D&D. That was a fun card to work on. And he's like, yeah, but like D&D, right? And yeah, so but yeah, when I mentioned I imagine in the movie version when they're recreating our lives on the big screen, it'll like zoom into my mouth, and then it'll go into slow motion, but it'll be in like silent, and it'll be like, I'm not going to do it in silent because this is a podcast, but I'll say, I'm interested in playing D&D. and the camera will just like then cut straight to Ben's eyes as they open slowly, and he like his maw reaches out and it zooms into his mouth and then comes out. like his mouth.
He just swallows you.
Yeah, and then the camera zooms out, and it's like the dice have been rolled on the table, and we're all just like around the table just playing D&D for a year.
I mean, there's worse things that could happen to you, Jack.
Yeah. No, I look honestly, it's one of the greatest things that has ever happened to me. It's so good. But yeah, that's how I met Ben,
the middleman.
And then we all played. We played that campaign with Greg for like a year, maybe a little bit longer. And Greg started to go, "Hey, what do you reckon about podcasting?" And we were very, very loose in those private games. Like we were a bit protective about putting it onto the airwaves, but then we did it, and you guys have heard the results.
Yeah,
the rest is history.
And then we met. You guys. When did you guys meet Lauren?
Through Emil. So here I am, just going on my merry way, being a comedian, and doing stand-up and getting on stage and performing and going to a bunch of different festivals. And I started going to Adelaide Fringe quite regularly. And when I was in Adelaide doing a split show with my friend Claire Sullivan, who I do my Elementary Springfield podcast with. And me and Claire were babies. I reckon we'd only been doing comedy like 2 years at that point in time. So, and she came up to me drunkenly, hadn't met me before, at a gig, and was like, "Are you Lauren?" And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "My friend just said that you're looking for someone else to do a show with." And
Amazing.
We did. And then we went to Adelaide Fringe together in fucking 2012, maybe?
Whoa.
Something like that. And when we were there, we had a good time together. We did our show. Our show was pretty shit. But we, just like hung out with a bunch of the Adelaide comedians. Adelaide Fringe is an amazing festival because you just meet all kinds of people from all over Australia. It's the biggest arts festival in Australia. So, and they've also got an amazing setup. There's a huge outdoor bar that is just for the artists. So you need a pass, an artist pass. You need to be doing a show in order to get in. So, of course, we spent all of our fucking time there the minute the show ended. We were like, cool, where's everybody at? Meanwhile, we had been staying in various accommodations along the way. We stayed with some friends. We had this other shitty hotel. And then the last weekend of the festival the last weekend we were there also coincided with the Clipsal 500, which is a motor car race. So Adelaide Fringe.
A motor vehicle race.
A motor vehicle race, which is a nice way of putting it. It's also Bogan Central. And there's a horrible weekend where Adelaide Fringe is completely overtaken by petrol heads and people that don't know what the arts is, and a bunch of fruity, ridiculous fringe artists, and everyone mingles together, and it's a nightmare. Which is also the last weekend.
Of course, was at the Calypso 500.
Calypso 500. Yeah.
And
I can say that because he's not here. Sorry.
Yeah. So we were. She put us in the worst backpackers in Adelaide. She'd booked us in the worst one. It was fucking horrendous. It was so nasty and filthy. And the old woman was changing the linen, and she came in one day and was like, "Oh, I don't know, you girls, those men downstairs are absolutely horrible. If I had my druthers, I'd be a lesbian." It was real weird. So on that final weekend, I think what happened is Emil was there doing a show with a couple of other people from VCA, Chelsea and a couple of others. Mm-hmm. It was a clowning show, so I think they developed this piece as part of VCA, and then they took it to Adelaide Fringe. And I think we must have met them at the bar. I can't quite remember. And we went. I remember seeing the show, and it was funny. And there were like 4 fucking cool people, and that's an instant group. So artists all magnate to each other. So what had happened is. I had picked up, so I was off with a guy, so I didn't spend the night in the hostel that night, and Claire and Emil had taken a liking to each other. So she took him back to the hostel, Except we were in an 8-bed dorm with other people that were there for Clipsal. From what I understand, Claire and Emil did not really care.
Amazing.
So
They did not roll a stealth check.
They failed their stealth check. Yeah.
So I came home in the morning to pick up some stuff or just say hi, and I think I just missed Emil. But Claire was like, yeah. So everybody was like sleeping, and I brought him in, and we just took the bottom bunk. And she says that she thinks she remembers someone like getting up in the morning and being like, well, I guess we're getting the full experience, aren't we? I don't know what the full experience was.
They probably thought that they were part of the Calypso 500 thing. They're like, oh, man, this is wrong.
I love that we've named it the Calypso.
Yeah. So, like, I don't know. Then, like, I know we're friends on Facebook who kind of oscillated around. I don't think I even saw him intermittently again until he messaged me on Facebook in December in 2018 saying, hey, I make a podcast with some friends. It's a Dungeons and Dragons improv thing. It's been going for over a year now, and we want to start bringing in guests to add to the fun. I thought you'd be someone who'd fit the show really well. I've not seen him in a while. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure if you've had any experience playing D&D before. That's half the reason we want guests anyway, to help give the audience another access point. We don't really focus on the rules too much. In any case, it's far more about the role playing and improv. If you're interested, we could grab a beer with the crew, figure out what kind of character you'd like to play. Oh, that's right. You guys came to one of my gigs, didn't you?
Yeah.
The show is called Dice Paper Roll. Take care, talk soon, and then dropped in the link.
Is that the last time he talked to you on Facebook? Is that like the last message you've got in your Facebook Messenger?
The first and last, which is why she could access it so easily.
Yeah, so easy, yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah,
No,
the only other time he
after
contacted me was in 2016 looking for a comedy festival venue. So I was like, yep, sweet. My knowledge is surface level, is what I said back. And as I know the general drift, I've seen Stranger Things. And then, I think you guys came to a gig. I can't even remember. I think Dan came.
Yeah.
You came, Ben.
And Emil.
Yeah.
I think it was just
the three of
you
us.
Was that like
I don't think Jack or Greg came.
Like Bony Fish?
What was that like?
Yeah, it was at Boney, whatever it is.
What was that like for you, Lauren? Because was that weird? Was it like these guys are coming to check out if I'm funny first?
Yep, correct.
That totally wasn't what we were going for at all.
Once
let's just meet her in a relaxed environment
where she needs to perform in front of us.
It's not a relaxed environment. It's a comedy gig, everybody.
Totally.
They're fraught. I'm not quite relaxed.
Probably didn't help that Emil left halfway through your set, but
did he?
No, I'm joking.
Fucking hell.
I'm just taking advantage of the fact that he's not here.
And then that happened, and I was like, cool, like whatever these guys want to do. Like I was like, whatever these guys want to do. And then I came round to Ben's house to the recording, and I got there, and everyone was like chatting. We were all setting up, and I'm like, whatever these guys want to do. And then we had dinner and we kept talking, and I'm like, whatever these guys want to do. And I'd been there for 3 hours and we hadn't hit record yet. And I was like, okay, is it happening? Because
part of our ritual.
Comedians, you get up, if you're doing a podcast, you walk in, you sit down, you record, you fuck off. I have never in my life spent so much time at a podcast recording. Ever.
Yeah.
Ever, guys.
Yeah, we have a problem. Yeah.
I understand it now, obviously. I understand.
Lockdown's actually been good for us in terms of...
Actually, I would agree. Yeah. You sit down and you just fucking go
Get
for
it
it.
done.
It was, it was hilarious in my mind. I was like, these guys are just hanging out and having fun. What's that about? I was the weird one.
If you haven't... Oh, sorry, Lauren.
Yeah, you go.
I was going to say, if you haven't heard Lauren's episodes, she joins us in book 2, episode number 7 and 8, and plays Florence.
Yeah, and
The
I was like,
Dragonborn
it was
barbarian.
super chill. And then I fucked off for a while, and then we just started playing in the Adelaide Fringe because I was there.
Was that
and
last
then,
year?
Last year, and then
a year
things
ago?
just. But it was
Yeah,
it was a year ago,
18 months.
Almost two,
even
really.
longer, which is
Yeah.
weird. But I think because we do spend slabs of time not around, not recording or whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Mm.
And I think then we just all had to confess how in love we were with each other and how
Yeah.
I needed to be in this podcast more. And I think the feeling was
We just realized, we just realized we needed you in the podcast, Lauren. We just weren't funny enough. And so we're like, please, God,
As we've
don't ever leave us.
Because of my brain. It's not because I can now be the token girl. It's not about that.
Well, as with most men, we just outsourced our emotional labor to you.
I would laugh at that, except that's not true at all. I carry none of your burdens.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah. We're just so open about them.
But the first time I played D&D was on mic with you guys. That's it. This is the only D&D I've ever played, and I feel blessed as a result of that. I feel all of you crawled so I could run.
Yeah.
No other game
will,
be as good. Just saying.
Yeah.
I'm like,
no other game
I've,
of D&D.
I've
will
tried
ever be
playing
as good as
a
this.
game with my brothers and stuff and tried to get them into it, and it's just like they make it really difficult to have fun. Like it's just not the same compared to doing it with you fuckheads.
Yeah, it's different if you have like a long-term group and you know how to play, like how you play with each other and stuff. Like after we'd run with our game, Ben, for like, must have been like 8 years, we ran a campaign where, because there was 3 of us that had DM'd before, where we rotated the DM, the 3 of us. And that was a really incredible campaign. And I think that's as it's different because in the podcast you're so focused and there's so much character development and no one's too loose at the table most of the time. And whereas like in the home game you play for hours on end and everyone so it's I think it's a different experience, but I've never come across a game where you have this much development of character.
Lauren and I met on the night we were going to do a live show together.
Yeah, and in Adelaide. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd never met you before. You were this spectre.
Oh, yeah, because you were in England at the time.
That's right.
Jack.
Because the whole guest thing for the original for book 2 came in when Jack, you'd gone to London. We thought, well, let's
replace
play with some new people.
Yeah.
Let's use that spare mic.
Yeah, we paid for it, so
might as well use it. We got space at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, he's good. He'll do.
Yeah. Should we ask another question?
Yeah. That was so much fun. I haven't heard anyone's origin stories before either.
Yeah, do you know what? I don't think I had either.
Yeah. I love that Ben was like, "Oh, we've only got like 6 questions. It won't be enough."
And then we've just spent like half an hour talking about ourselves.
Half an hour, yeah.
I was
well told, though, people. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I was going to sort of segue into a DM question there, but I don't know. You look like you've got your eye on one there, Jack.
Oh, I was just going to read the next one, but
there's one for you down the bottom from Trevor Goodchild, which I think people would be interested in.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It says, this is one for Jack. Why were you so obsessed with playing a crab man? I can't help but think of South Park's crazy QEFTSG crab people episode. Should I know what that acronym stands for? I haven't watched South Park for a while.
Crab
people. Crab people.
Talk like crab.
Well,
look like crab.
Talk
like
people. Yes.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
It was great.
Well, to be honest, I hadn't seen that, so that's a bit embarrassing. Geez, why was I so obsessed with playing a crab person? I think I've always wanted to play a pretty strange. I like playing strange characters. I don't know if you noticed from the podcast, and I think like early on when we started playing 5th edition, I was like, oh, can I play something real weird? And I was like, oh, can I be a crab person? And both everyone kind of was like, yeah, that'd be cool, but like, nah.
Maybe down.
Maybe not. Just not for this one. And
we were like, it would be cool, but how are we going to do it? And we hadn't played 5th edition before.
That's the big thing to
too
know.
many
I think.
things
I
at
think
once.
I think also like we hadn't really figured out what the podcast was at that point. Like we didn't know what it was going to be.
We thought that playing 5th edition for the first time would be too much to then add in how do you do a whole new race? Because we thought 5th edition, we thought the podcast in 5th edition would, be about rules.
Probably wise in the end because we got Ariki's song out of it. So that was pretty
She
good.
plays a minor role in the campaign.
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
Ariki's
She's missing
Orky's song. Yeah, true. She's dead most of the time. Yeah, I think I like picking things that force me to do stuff that is unusual or different than my current experience of life. I think one of the greatest things about Dungeons and Dragons is its ability to let your imagination go fucking wild, and and I think for me, in my real life, I play a pretty standard, like our society's version of a default character.
Human
artist,
human male artist.
Yeah.
Human male artist.
Level 2.
With a podcast.
Oh, yeah. Ticking those boxes. Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, Caucasian human male artist.
Yeah.
The podcast comes, it's a special ability.
Yeah.
It's a racial feat.
It's a trait.
Exactly. And so
comes with the background.
Yeah. And so I think for me this has been something for me with all video games. Like I will never play as a male character in a video game if I'm given the option. So I try and push myself, and I think that I could see inside of there being a crab person that would push me into areas I wasn't necessarily prepared for, and I think there's also something nice about fish out of sea in a world that's unusual, and having a character who can be like, well, what is this all about? Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer it?
Yeah. I remember when we first started playing together, because you hadn't played D&D before, and that first campaign, the whole time, it was like you were trying to find the boundary, like the walls of the area or whatever, and something that you couldn't do.
Yeah.
I just remember at one point you're like, it's like I can do whatever. It's like you were asking for that boundary.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, you give it a go. If it's possible, you can do it. And I just remember how like excited you were by that.
Yeah. Well, there's one moment I remember where my character Vestel, who I had, unlike what I've just said, who was actually she was like me in that she was an atheist in a world that gods actually existed, and she was kind of quite annoyed about that. Like she didn't like the idea that there were gods. And then at one point we were playing and Greg was like, or some character, like I can't remember who said it, but it was like, oh yeah, you could even like kill a god if you wanted. And I was
and
just
everything
like,
went to slow motion.
yeah, everything
Yeah.
went to
Your
slow
eyes
motion,
lit.
and
Into
the
his
camera
eyes.
zoomed into my face, and my eyes bulged, and I
your
was
mouth
like,
went, I'm
a gold.
And then that became the campaign, was just to kill. It had to give Jack the moment to kill a god.
Yeah.
I remember though in that campaign, Jack, and I wonder if you might talk about it for a sec.
Yeah.
There was a moment with Sammy who was playing, and it was his first campaign of D&D as well, but he was playing a barbarian, like a half-orc barbarian, and I know that you know the moment I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
But there was that moment that just you went, fucking whoa, what?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that or...
Yeah, well, as a straight white man, there's a lot of experiences in the world that you don't often get forced into. A lot of the world is just like presented to you on a fucking platter, and you kind of just eat it up as it comes along. Well, for this white guy at least. And in this campaign, I was playing a woman, and Sam, whose character became attracted to my character, unbeknownst. Well, it was kind of. Was it unbeknownst? It wasn't unbeknownst.
It was beknownst.
It was beknownst.
He wasn't very subtle about it.
No, he wasn't subtle about it.
It was pretty beknownst.
Yeah. But
generally.
I mean, all of the players certainly knew.
Yeah. And when we used to play, we were pretty distracted. So like I was pretty bad. I would like sit on my iPad and draw while we were playing. And so I wasn't really paying attention this one time. And we were sitting around a campfire or something, and Krusk, Sammy's character, rolled to do a stealth check to see if he could, what was it? Like grow a butt.
What?
Yeah.
Grabbed your butt.
He
I think
grabbed
it
my
was
butt.
after something. It was like
Yeah.
It wasn't around a campfire. It was like a post-combat thing.
Oh, right. That's right. And he was not a stealthy character, but he rolled really well. And I didn't see it happen in real life, and I didn't see it happen in the game, and I have never felt so violated in my life. And like it's kind of a horrible story in a way, but it was the moment where I was like, oh fuck, this game is incredible. Like it just gave me an experience that like, you know, it's not even really like that big a deal. Like it didn't happen. It wasn't. But it was an eye-opening experience in that it had presented me something in a way that I experienced it, or like viscerally. That you know, you can be told a million times how horrible it is to operate inside of this world as a woman. And you can say I understand, and I certainly cannot say I understand, but it definitely I felt it a lot more strongly in that moment than I think I've ever been able to. I think, yeah.
Well, it's really immersive, isn't it?
Yeah,
You're literally totally in that place.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it was in a way really special moment, but yeah, really good.
It has a really strong, like I think we talked about this in one of the dissections that we published for Curse of Strahd about like the racism element in Curse of Strahd and dealing with that. But I think if like it has a real power to make you see things from a different perspective. It's like that. It reminds me of like is it Invisible Theatre, Boal? It does that, where it's like they do scenes in a crowded train or something, and it'll be like a family or domestic violence scene, or like a assault or something, or an act of racism, or and that just confronts the audience with the thing that they might know of but don't actually see or experience. And, but I think that power is the most, like, it's that the power in that is in being in D&D for me, is in being at the table.
Yeah. Well, the next thing that happened was also like I got to experience an extremely great power fantasy, which was that I rolled to like counter that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what did you do? Like, what was your response?
I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I rolled really well. I can't remember if it was a 20 exactly, but it like the experience was as if I had rolled a 20. And I basically threw him, like grabbed his arm, threw him around and launched myself on top of him and held a knife at his throat and said, "Don't you ever fucking do that to me again, or don't you lay your hands on me again," or something like that.
Fuck yes!
Yeah, it was
really. I love it.
Yeah, it was
fantasy.
And like, do you know what? Like, it has never been the same since that moment. Like, this game for me has like it has elevated it to a moment of like just like I finally understood the potential of this game and the medium around it. And I'm not a performer, like I haven't been a performer before this, so like I hadn't really had that experience of, you know, performance in that way. And it was really good. This game's good. It's good. It's a pretty good game.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's a good game.
Yeah.
Oh, pretty good.
Yeah. Oh,
great answer,
Thanks for
Jack.
sharing that story, Jack, as well.
no worries.
It's a really personal experience.
Yeah, it was. But I hope other people get to experience it. I think when we started the podcast, it was very much like, from my perspective, it was like, I want other people to experience this. And if we can convince other people to pick up D&D because they've listened to our podcast, and I want them to feel like it's approachable and something that, you know, they're not going to be bogged down by the rules. They can just enjoy and have an excuse to put on some dumb voices with each other. That was always the goal for me with this podcast. Like, just one other person to play D&D, and I would be like, yeah, fuck yeah.
Well, it's me, Jack. So well
done. This is not a question from one of the patrons, but I feel like it kind of leads on, or I'm interested to know what your guys' experiences are of going from playing to then podcasting as playing D&D, which I'm just realizing now asking Lauren might.
If anything, I'm the other way around. I've gone from podcasting to playing D&D, which is
on a podcast.
Maybe you should talk about that experience first.
Well, I think it lends itself back to, you know, every comedian has a podcast. At the point where I started, where I was doing, when we played our first games and I first met you guys, I didn't have my own. I now do. It was inevitable. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I had guested on many, many other podcasts, and I guess I knew a lot of people that did podcasts.
Right.
And I think part of me not wanting to do my own was seeing how much work it was, essentially. And even though they were always very chatty, very comedy podcasts, you know, there might be some kind of loose theme, or like we all watch this thing, or, you know, something like there's some sort of loose situation, but it is mostly all about like getting in, getting the banter, getting the jokes up, trying to make each other laugh. And in a podcast form as well, like, you know, you kind of you want it to look even more super spics and spexy, you know, you want to have it really kind of pop. But you know, depending on how, you know, how far you had to travel to get to the comedian's house in order to do the podcast. And I will tell you, I have been burnt by doing many a shitty podcast. I won't name names, but they are out there. And I have done them because I will do anything. I'm a podcast slut.
We'll just name and shame them in the podcast description.
We'll do the podcast where we reveal all the shitty podcasts. So which is why I said yes to a meal, essentially. I was like, cool, one more thing, because it's all like, podcasts also about plugging other stuff. I'm always doing shows. I'm always, exactly. Exposure.
Paid and exposure.
Then not having played D&D before, and been surrounded by people that knew exactly what they were doing.
So you thought.
Yes, that's what I thought. But instead of feeling intimidated, I think I've just felt really supported instead, because the thing you cared the most about was D&D and making the game good, and there wasn't any egos on the table, which is something I have not seen in another comedy podcast.
I have an extremely big ego. Thank you very much.
I mean, Jack has been speaking for
but you weren't there the first time, Jack. Okay.
Yeah. Welcome to Mailbag with Jack Crosby.
And some other people,
some other
extras.
But I think, making a D&D podcast, I don't know how. I've never not played D&D outside of a podcast situation, so I don't know what that's like. But within a podcast situation, for me at least as a comedian, it's another way to perform. It's another way to improv with people, share a story, that giving and taking of responsibility, power, the way you support each other in a campaign is just really fucking sweet. Like, you just don't feel like you're doing it by yourself, which stand-up often is. So I've just found it to be a really beautiful respite, a different way of performing that I didn't realize I could do. So I feel like I've really discovered another aspect of myself through doing this. Use cunts are great.
Isn't D&D wonderful?
Isn't it wonderful? Bring
we sound like
people
we're talking
together.
about a cult now.
And it's playing another character and playing a fucking dragon bitch, and now playing some like kick-ass like assassin. It's so I've never been able. It's like being a kid again.
Yeah, really is.
It really is.
So that's my answer. What about you guys? Playing D&D to going to a podcast, is it like the same way that any other podcast gets made, which is when everyone is just sitting around really wasted and saying, we're so funny, we need to share this?
Pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much.
It is,
a little bit.
At the start, it was like, we'll just put a mic in the room and we'll just hit record and just put up our games. No editing.
Nothing.
Really?
Like we'll balls and all. We'll just go for it.
No editing. That's what a great idea.
What a dream.
We never did we?
Yeah, that was the original idea.
That was the plan.
But
then we listened back and we were like,
and then Ben's sphincter just clenched every time. We made an off-color joke or like.
There's a lot of shit that went to the cutting room floor that absolutely belongs there because those first 18 eps were
no doubt.
Yeah, 100%.
No doubt.
A lot like our table games.
Ben is by far the most the MVP of the podcast. Like it's just
and the slave labor that Ben has put in over the years in editing cannot be underestimated. So thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
This is the first and last time I'll thank you on air. And
I will treasure it. I'm going to make it my ringtone.
He's going to edit that clip and do a ringtone.
But switching was difficult because I found it difficult because we did play a very, very loose game. And I was worried that we were going to lose. The fear for me, because I I love D&D so much, and I value it so much, and always have. And most of the people I've played with are like, yeah, other people like D&D, but you, Greg, like obsessively love D&D. And so I was terrified that turning it into a podcast would take the fun away. And so I was at the start really guarded about that. But actually, like there's so many lessons we've learned as we went along. Like we recorded, I think it was like 8 or 12 episodes or 8 episodes first up, and then
7.
We released them, and then once we listened back, there was things we were learning and feedback we were getting, and we wished we hadn't gone so far ahead. And,
yeah, we did all 18 episodes up to your arc before we
actually released
listened or released.
Yeah. So there was so much we wanted to put in there or change that we couldn't at the start, and the amount of editing and music and stuff that we did for that first book was just way too much on a weekly schedule.
Yeah.
You know, it was so draining on everyone to do so many episodes. But I'm straying from the question a bit, I think.
Yeah.
But,
I think some of the best for me, I mean, I only played one other campaign, but I think it dramatically made the experience better. Like we didn't do voices before. Like we didn't do we used to play with little figurines on a map that we drew out with a whiteboard marker. It was very nerdy, but it was like, well, I guess not nerdy. I guess just the way that you're told to play.
More traditional?
I think one of the like kind of biggest things that changed was like previously in that campaign that Jack's talking about, like it was very rules oriented. We were using the grid. It was 30 feet of movement. You had these things did these things, blah blah blah. And in the first 2 episodes that we recorded, we did miniatures and battle grid and that sort of stuff, and we straight away realized that it just doesn't translate as well to podcasting. And so we got rid of it, and we had to change and evolve our play style in what we were doing. And I think as the podcast has continued on, and the more that we've been doing that, like I think we learned a shitload of lessons once we actually started releasing episodes after that 18th, like after Ben's first arc or whatever. And then it took another big change in the way that we were doing things from Greg's arc onwards. And it's just been that constant evolution of how we actually play the game and the stuff that we're stripping away from it and what is kind of important to the play style and what we're actually creating in terms of the main things is role play, improv, fucking around and having a good time. Like everything else, it's like, you know, I feel like when I'm DMing, it's, you know, oh, how far away is that thing? Oh, it's like a conveniently placed distance from where you are in order for you to do the thing that you want to do. What do you want to do? Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, there's a rock right there that you can leap off of and do a backflip through the air. Just roll the dice and let's see if you actually get to do that thing.
Yeah,
it's like in filmmaking, like you very rarely show someone walking up or down the stairs. Like it's unless it's like for a very dramatic purpose or reason.
Yeah.
And so like we almost in our talking about like in the game we started kind of self-editing that stuff where it was like it's not interesting to talk about how far away something is. Like that no one gives a shit.
Or it's not interesting to hear us go, I move here. It's like, what the fuck? So for me, the biggest thing is it became performative, where the awareness of the fact that there was an audience listening and the fact I remember that very first episode, because we did do a couple of tests just recording like one of my games or something like that. And we were like, yeah, cool. The microphone works. We didn't really listen to the content. But I remember always, and Greg and I have played for 20 odd years now, like really your voices were either English or if your character voice was like, you, like, this is my cool voice.
Batman voice.
Yeah, it's like
Yep.
kind of like your Batman voice, which you never really did because you felt really self-conscious to do it. And I remember we kind of all said, are we going to do voices in the podcast? And we did it, but we never really did them in front of each other until we hit record on that very first episode. And I think if you go back and listen to it, you can kind of hear that nervousness of like introducing ourselves, and we like the energy between that and how we introduce ourselves now obviously has changed a lot because you get used to it. And I remember listening to you commit to your voice for the first time ever, Jack, because not a performer. And I think your first line, you may not have done a voice, but then when you committed, everyone was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was adamant I wasn't going to do voices. Like, I think I was like, nah, I'm not going to do a voice.
And then everyone else started doing one.
Yeah.
It's like,
you didn't tell me that. When I did my episode, you didn't tell me you did voices. And so we hit play, and everyone, and then Emil goes, I'm Brackeye the Bobby. And I was like, shit, what?
Amazing.
So what did I do? I did a fucking English accent, bitches. Yeah.
But what a character, because going from English and then when you rage and then go Cockney, that was
That was great.
Yes.
So
I think
good.
when Jack was mentioning his butt grope visceral immersive moment, I think mine was the raging into a Cockney voice. I think that was when I went, because that was like pure improv. I didn't know that was happening until it happened out of my mouth, and that's when I went, oh, this D&D shit's pretty good. This is pretty fucking fun, actually. Yeah.
I think
one way that a friend of mine, Laura, was talking to me about Curse of Strahd the other night, and she raised something which was like a real light bulb moment for me on how much podcasting had changed the way that I DM'd and we all DM'd the game, and the way that like we controlled the game, and the way that it became so much more a shared story than it had been before, rather than like me telling a story. And yeah, so she, said like, oh, it's amazing. Like you set the DC for roles or whatever, and you say whether they succeed or fail, but everybody takes it on themselves to describe their own action and say how things work out. And we'll just grab a hold of the narrative and take it off in a different direction. And there's no like, as the DM, you rarely say no, which is a big change, I think, from the way we used to play.
Big time.
And I think is one of the best changes, because I think that's how D&D really should be played.
Yes.
In that collaborative storytelling.
Yeah, the yes and yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to, like, I think it's rare that it is this collaborative, and I think it's hard to accept that when you build a universe and build a game and you're trying to tell a story and keep everyone on track for that. And but I think it's worked out in the best
going to,
stories.
Say is like similarly, I didn't actually mention it before, but it's like the biggest change for me actually was that I began DMing. Because the first time that I ever played, I just played the game. And then when we started doing the podcast, I think I started getting into Critical Role and that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, 5th edition seems like it's pretty legit. Like, it seems pretty cool. And so then I read the 5th edition book, and no one else had read it. And so then it was like, oh, Dan, you're pretty across the rules for this thing now. So maybe you should just DM it. And like, I was just thinking when we were saying about like that.
I've never been so rewarded by not doing homework.
Me too.
that nervousness. Like, I mean, I know that I was definitely nervous in those first few episodes because I'd never fucking DM'd before. But
so you were DMing for the first time on the podcast?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
I ran one
episode
combat.
1.
I ran one combat before that, and So, but then I think in terms of the way that I've learnt to DM, just jumping on of what Greg was saying, was because I'm don't have the same kind of experience as what Ben and Greg did, that I felt like I needed like the whole yes and like that's a great idea, awesome, I'm gonna just go with that thing because at the moment I can't fucking think of anything, and that was an idea, and so I'm just going along with whatever that was, you know. And I think that like that definitely influenced the way that I played the game, and just being like a bit more relaxed about how much I need to actually like, I need to have a story and what I want to get done and what the pertinent information is, but just going for, well, what does the player want to do? And the more that we started bringing other elements into it, the more that then as a DM I kind of went like, yep, let's go with that. Like, I mean, I still fondly think back to the episode where Emil started saying that he was handing out weapons to old people and babies and shit. And it was like, I just thought that was super funny. And I didn't.
Emil's pretty guilty of contributing to the narrative the most.
Which I think leads quite nicely into another question, which is how do the different DMs control the chaos, or do you even try, by Tez. But I suspect that might be a rather lengthy answer, and it might be a good time for us to maybe pause and have a break, or end this episode if we do a whole episode, and we will continue our conversation in a little bit.
This feels less like a mailbag and more like this is like DPR presents D&D D&Ms.
It really DPR does. On the couch. Right?
Remotely.
It all began when... Anyway. Anyway, thanks for delving into our mailbag, everyone. We look forward to you rummaging around in here again next time.
Bye.
What?
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Peace.